Aunt Stevie's youngest daughter became the sister I always wanted. She taught me how to tie my shoes, things my parents didn't always tune into as they worked two jobs. So during this time, my mom took care of other people's children to make ends meet. In between playing with our pets, recording songs off the radio onto cassette, and scribbling crushes in my diaries. Now, don't lose those keys. You'll never find out who you really loved when you were younger. I'd climb over the fence, the physical divider of our front porches. So I'd hang out with my newfound sister, but we always need to check on her dad, bring him something to eat. So at that point, there were no paid caretakers who came in, no nurses either. The rest of her family lived far away. So one time he fell out of bed. At that point, you didn't call 911 as people do today. The neighbors came. Everyone worked carefully to get him back into position. In my child's mind, I didn't think about sponge bathing, bed sores, or toileting. As neighbors, we helped with what we could. We tried to ease things for them. Compassion and empathy wasn't abstract like what they preached in Sunday Mass. This was concrete. One summer, my older brother was hit by a car while crossing the busy street in front of our house. He was laid up in a body cast for months. I'm sure I had to do some nursemaiding. When I got my ears pierced, it was the first time I recall going to the doctors. Claire or the mall piercing booths didn't exist back then, unless your Nana did it old school with ice determination along with a very sharp needle. You went to the doctor who wielded the gun. The doctor's wife was my brother's art teacher. I remember going to their outdoor gallery, then indoors to their home medical offices. It's very small towny in a good way. The doctor, art teacher, wife team were Italian, as was our dentist. It was only later in life did I find out that my grandparents knew our dentist parents. They knew more about us. We didn't appear to be a group of symptoms. We were friends from the old neighborhood. Problems with our current health care system, that's going to be covered in another chapter. So we'll get to that. But in the past, it was, much smaller, it was different. So 2 doors down from us lived a close friend of ours. It was a 3-bedroom house, yet a closet in her parents' room was her bedroom because not only did she have 2 brothers, she had a grandfather who lived with them until he died. So across the street was a playmate whose mom got cancer. Ignorant me didn't think about the larger implication. Never having met her mother, it just seemed normal that her father was a single dad. In the evening, we'd go over, say hi to this quiet man who's reading his newspaper, then go up and listen to music in her room. We never discussed who cooked, cleaned, or what it was like to be motherless. The latest hit on the radio is what we were focused on. Maybe this normalcy was just what our friend needed. So across the street from our house lived 2 elderly people, each alone in their homes. We were taught to notice if the car sat too long, observe if the newspapers weren't picked up, or lights not coming on. It would mean there'd be a problem. So each of these people, they had relatives, but they didn't live close. So it was always important to notice the details. So this urgent desire to control live events or lives of others is just in my DNA. So nuns at the Catholic school were strict, but other than putting money in the collection plate, service wasn't required of the students. Confession and not touching yourself was. I think they would have had us volunteer, but the nuns deferred that to the boys and the Girl Scouts, which I was a Girl Scout for a while, maybe only just a brownie, but I remember stacks of cookies in our kitchen. So visions of scratching. Oh. So what I got at parochial school, though, were all my vaccine shots. Although we still got the chicken pox, visions of scratching like crazy along with pink calamine lotion still haunt me. So, when we were little on weekends, we accompanied our dad as he took his mom to get fitted for orthopedic shoes, those special corsets, which was also a back brace for her. to the Italian market in South Philly so she could get her specialty items. So imprinted on my memory forever was helping Grandma take off her Victorian torture device. Her boobs reached her knees. It was the only time I saw her laugh. My father, he paid her bills. My mother did a lot of checking on her because it was on her way to work. She also got some free information because one of her coworkers lived right next door to my granny. So even after my parents' divorce, my mom did so much of the work. How it all falls to the women. That's a whole other book. But, I think most of you got that sense. So during this time when I wasn't working or going to school, I was reading mysteries, music magazines, practicing the piano, bringing my transistor radio along wherever I went. Back then, they didn't have the trendy term sandwich generation to describe raising kids and helping your parents at the same time. We learned you just plowed through it. Everyone had their role to do. You did it, and then you all got through. So later, my dad's brother and his wife moved a block away from my grandmom. My uncle never did anything for his mother. Years later, we found out the boy who actually helped my grandmother by mowing her lawn. My brothers and I were too busy at our own house doing all the outside chores. So this lawnmower for Granny turned into my stepbrother. Who knew? What a small world. So him and his parents, they lived one block from my grandmom in a different direction. So, my future stepmom, she worked for a service which helped seniors stay at home. So when my father needed another hip replacement as my parents' divorce was happening, this visiting angel took care of my dad. From then on, she was known as his angel. So at this point in my life, caretaking, the kind of caretaking that I was doing was doling out the best music advice while working for Sam Goody's competitor, Listening Booth. How many of you remember Listening Booth? I loved working there. So, our customers couldn't wait for their next dose of music from me. So soon after, I was living in my grandmom's unfinished attic. Unofficially, I was keeping an eye on her. Officially, she had fallen a couple times. We got her the necklace, but, once in the ground, she was too proud, or maybe she thought it was just going to be too expensive if she pushed the button. She was getting Meals on Wheels. People from the church were visiting her. She complained about it all. If anything, my grandma was inspired to cook for me. So that was a nice thing about staying with her. It gave her a sense of purpose. And my job was to trim and cut her gross old lady nails. Smelly, yellow, deformed. We're all going to get there, but gosh, ew. So confession time. I did willingly watch Lawrence Welk with her a few times, noshing on Stella D'Or, those S-shaped cookies, or eating the anisette biscotti between working full-time while going to college. Eventually I moved out and Granny spent her last 2 years in a nursing home. You could bring your pet in to visit. So Grandma still liked seeing my dog. So my mother is one of 12. Her mother died young of a heart attack. I mean, come on, no kidding, 12 kids. So growing up, there were no grandfathers. They were jerks, older than their wives, alcoholics. Then they died on them, leaving their wives worse off financially, but yet relieved. When my mother's sister struggled with mental illness, Mom took me to see them. My mother's family were always gathering at our house. So hosting people at your house, it was a fun way to see how they're managing in life. It did ease my mom's mind. So that's a little history. And speaking of history, that right back there, see that? That is the radio that was in Grandma's house. It's an old, probably 1940s stand-up tube radio. So I still have some of Granny's stuff. So next time, we're going to move on to our first adventure. As usual, there's going to be a music playlist in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with those who need it. So I have another question for you this week. So in families, Is there a difference between wiping the butts or making sure that the butts get wiped? So if you have a suggestion on someone I should interview or resource, put it in the comments below, please, or send me an email at theimpassionedcaregiver@gmail.com. And hey, we're going to get better technically and all this. This is just the beginning. Someday we're going to look back and say, oh, wow, she learned a lot. Have a great week and talk to you soon.